If you're looking to get better performance and better fuel economy out of your car or truck, then I'm willing to bet that all you need is a simple tune-up. In this video, I'm going to go over the parts and components you need to do a simple tune-up, show you how to do it, and also have a lot of really good tips and tricks and information throughout this entire video. So make sure you watch until the very end. And if you want to learn how to fix your vehicle, do budget restorations, troubleshoot equipment, and all sorts of other types of garage-related stuff, be sure to subscribe to Midwest Garage so you don't miss anything. Now, what does a tune-up consist of? Everybody has a little bit of a different opinion pertaining to what exactly a tune-up consists of. I'm going to go over what I feel is the most important. Some people say there's more to it, some people say there's less. If you have any questions about that, just go to your repair manual. I know that we have the internet nowadays, but I'll always stand by a good repair manual because this has nothing but the facts. It doesn't have anybody's opinion on the internet on what you should or shouldn't do, things like that. So, as recommended before, get yourself a repair manual for your specific vehicle, and it has exactly what you need, and it'll tell you what a simple and what a major tune-up consists of. Now, take down some quick notes so that you can get all these parts at once when you go to the parts store to do your tune-up. A tune-up consists of doing an oil change, replacing your air filter, replacing your cabin air filter, changing out your spark plugs, your spark plug wires, your cap and rotor if applicable, your fuel filter if applicable, O2 sensors, and your PCV valve. Now, the best part about doing a simple tune-up is that anybody can do it with very basic hand tools. The first thing that I like to do is an oil change, and you need to do an oil change more often than you do a tune-up. There's still this myth going on that you need to change your oil every 3,000 miles, but I'll tell you that is not the case. Oils are so much different nowadays. Oil filters are so much different nowadays. I would recommend doing it every 5,000 miles at the absolute most. I mean, even for this old of a vehicle, looking in the repair manual, it says every 7,500 miles to change the engine oil and oil filter. And most new vehicles nowadays recommend that you change the oil every 10,000 miles. One thing that I would like to stress about your oil change, which we already did on Labatt here, so I'm not going to go over that in depth. I also have a video on this channel talking about how to do an oil change. I'll link that down in the description below so that you can watch it after this video if you're curious on how I change oil. But one thing that I like to do differently is replace 1 quart of oil with 1 quart of Marvel Mystery Oil. Some people call it snake oil, but I can tell you I've seen a difference. My engine oil, when I first started using MMO, would come out extremely dirty almost instantly, and that's because it was doing its job. It was cleaning the inside of the engine, and now that I've been using it consistently over the years in all my vehicles, my engine oil stays a lot cleaner, a lot longer, because the inside is already clean. Some people prefer seafoam, some people prefer MMO, and those two are always kind of battling it out for which one is better. I've always been partial to MMO though. And this stuff is great because you can use it with conventional oil, synthetic oil, 2-stroke engines, 4-stroke engines, pretty much anything. You can even add it to your gas tank to clean your fuel system. And if you have an older diesel, older than a 2007, you can even use this in diesel fuel. Last thing about oil changes is that it doesn't matter what brand of oil that you use. I have another video on that, but I do suggest getting a quality filter because that's really the important part. Also, whenever you do your oil change, you should be checking grease points and zerk fittings all over the chassis of the vehicle to make sure that those are properly greased. That's something that a lot of people miss, and over time those parts will last a lot longer if you keep them greased and you do your preventative maintenance every time you do your oil change. Next part of your tune-up would be your spark plugs. I went with these ones because they're relatively cheap, and this truck being over 40 years old and it's just a work truck and a project, I'm not going to go and spend a ton of money on E3 spark plugs. They all do a pretty good job, and I do have a really good video on this channel called Spark Plugs 101, and I highly suggest you go watch that video after this one. It has all the information and pretty much everything you need to know about spark plugs and how they work, and how to read them to tell how your engine is actually running, because a spark plug will tell you a lot about what is going on in the inside of the engine. So like I said, definitely go check out that video. It's called Spark Plugs 101, and it tells you all about these little guys and how important they are. Obviously, if you have An 8-cylinder engine, you need 8 of these. 4-banger, 4 of them. 6-cylinder, 6 of them. Some vehicles, they're harder to change than others. They're all very easy to change. It's just getting to them that's the hard part, because a lot of them on some vehicles are just hard to reach. Now, some people say to change your spark plugs every 100,000 miles. Some people say every 30,000 miles. You'll have to check your service manual to find out what your manufacturer recommends. But along with that is changing your plug wires. Now, these wear out over time and they become less efficient basically. And so these need to be replaced at least, if not more often, than your spark plugs. So you can see on this old small block 350 that the plugs and wires are very easy to get to. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the plug wires obviously go on up to your distributor cap. And it's easiest to replace these one at a time so that you don't get your plug wires out of order, because if you do, you're going to mess up the timing and the engine's going to run rough, if it does run at all, and it'll just be a big mess. Now, something like this in this newer vehicle, you'll see that the spark plugs are underneath this coil pack, and so you remove that and then the plug is right underneath, but they unscrew from the head just like they would on any other engine. Now, if you have an older vehicle like this, you're going to have a cap and rotor also. And once again, I have a really good video on this channel explaining what a cap and rotor does and why they're important to replace every 15,000 miles or so. So definitely go check that out. It's linked down in the description below. So once again, add it to the list of videos to watch after this one. Either way, very important to replace these components if you have an older vehicle. And of course, a newer vehicle like this doesn't have a distributor cap and rotor. It has a coil for each individual cylinder, and so that's how it gets its spark. And those don't necessarily have to be replaced until they go bad. What I will say though is that once one goes bad, it's best to replace all of them all at once, and it does get to be a little bit expensive, unfortunately. Next thing to replace during your tune-up is your air filter. Air filters come in many different brands and shapes and sizes. I recommend getting a decent brand. I usually go with Wix. You really can't go wrong with Wix. This is an STP. Once again, on this old work truck, I just went with something a little bit cheaper, but most filters are a paper element like this, and kind of the rule of thumb is that when you pull your old one off, if you hold it up to the sun or to a bright light and you can see light through it, then it's still good to go. But I would recommend changing this out every 15,000 miles at the absolute most. And these are really easy to replace. Most vehicles have an air box that you just unclip, open it up, replace the filter. Something like this, it's just very easy. You just open up your air cleaner and swap out the new one. Since we're talking about air filters, the next one that you want to replace every 15,000 miles is your cabin air filter. What the cabin air filter does is filter the air that actually goes into the cab, and this will often get clogged with dirt and leaves and debris and all that stuff that's being sucked in that you eventually end up breathing. So changing out your cabin air filter is very important. This truck, even my 1997 Silverado, does not have a cabin air filter. It's more so for newer vehicles, but you'll often find them up in this shroud, up in here on the passenger side, or underneath the dash next to the glove box. If you do a quick Google search of your vehicle, you'll be able to find out where the cabin air filter is and how to replace it. And the next filter you want to replace, if applicable, is your fuel filter. Now, if you have a carbureted engine with a manual fuel pump, your fuel filter will probably look something like this, and it simply goes in the fuel line where the fuel line meets the carburetor, and you just slide the old one out, put the new one in. Changing out your fuel filter is important because obviously you want the cleanest fuel possible going into your engine so that it can burn as efficiently as possible. The other reason is because if this gets clogged, then guess what? Your engine's not running. So if you have one like this, they're pretty easy to swap out and they're very cheap. If you have a little bit older of a vehicle, but it's fuel injected, you're gonna have an inline fuel filter that looks something like this. This is on my 97 Chevy once again. A lot of fuel filters look just like this. They're pretty easy to replace, and you need to do those at least every 30,000 miles. And another important reason to replace these is that once they get dirty or clogged up, then your electric fuel pump has to work that much harder to try and pump the fuel through that dirty filter, which can end up burning out your fuel pump prematurely. Once again, do a quick Google search of fuel filters for your specific vehicle, because there are a lot of vehicles that have a non-serviceable fuel filter, and that's because the fuel filter is actually inside the fuel tank next to the fuel pump. And those are supposed to last and stay clean for the life of the vehicle or the life of the fuel pump. Next is your PCV valve, or some people call it the PCV filter, and PCV stands for positive crankcase ventilation. Basically what this does is there's gases inside the engine, inside the crankcase, and this vents them out and ensures that those toxic vapors aren't released into the atmosphere. These are very cheap and very easy to replace, and you'll usually find them either going into your air box or air cleaner or into a valve cover. Some of the symptoms that might tell you that you have a bad PCV valve is that you'll have a more smoky exhaust coming out of your tailpipe, your engine might stutter or not run quite as well, or your engine could be burning oil. And those are just some of the signs that you could have a bad PCV valve. The easy way to check your PCV valve is to pull your old one out and simply give it a light shake, because what this has is a ball valve in there, or a check valve, and when you shake it, you'll hear that ball valve in there moving, and it has to move freely. Oftentimes the old ones will get gummed up with oil residue and carbon and stuff like that, and so that ball valve isn't going to work anymore, and then it's time to replace it. Now, last but certainly not least is your O2 sensors. What an O2 sensor does is monitor the ratio of air and fuel inside your exhaust system to make sure that the engine is burning as efficiently as possible and you're not releasing excess gas vapors basically into the atmosphere. It's kind of one of those EPA things, and don't quote me on this, but I believe starting in 1981 is when all vehicles had to have an O2 sensor. Nowadays, most vehicles have many O2 sensors, up to 4 of them. The reason these go bad is because they literally screw into your exhaust system, and so they get clogged up with carbon and exhaust and all that stuff, and pretty soon they quit being able to monitor that air-fuel mixture, and then you run into all sorts of problems such as terrible fuel economy. Your engine's not going to run right. It could be running too lean or too rich. Usually the engine will run too rich, which means that you're going to get bad gas mileage. In my 97 Chevy, on a good day I'm normally getting around 16 miles per gallon. I had some bad O2 sensors that went out, and suddenly my truck was getting 10 miles to the gallon. So it's very noticeable. These are easy to replace. Sometimes they're hard to get to. If you can't get to them, you have to bring it to a shop. It gets a little bit expensive, but it's better than having your fuel economy reduced by up to 30%. It's also really hard on the engine if these go bad, because then it's not running right. The good thing with these is they often throw a code, so your check engine light will come on, and then you can hook up a scan tool. Then you can see that your O2 sensors are crappy and they need to be replaced. Fun fact about O2 sensors, they are also called lambda sensors, and that's because they monitor the ratio of air to fuel, and that ratio is called the lambda ratio. So now you can say that I actually touched something in this video. If you already knew that it was called a lambda sensor, then let me know down in the comments below. Make sure you check out the other videos like I mentioned before. They're linked down below. Those will give you additional information on some of these components, why they're important, and how to change them out. So that pretty much sums up how to do a simple tune-up. If you have any additional questions whatsoever, leave them down in the comments below. And feel free to check out some of these other videos that pop up along here. We're going to be getting back to this work truck revival project very soon. So if you want, check that out up here. This is the entire playlist. So that way you can see where we're at with this project and where we plan on going in the very near future. Also, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.